Today, I'm going to be doing a digital deep dive on microform pricing and the different cost levers that will affect your project. When I say microform, that means microfilm, microfiche, and Aperture cards. They're all in the microform family. So we're going to be going each of those, and again, the different factors that will affect the price of your project and the costs that go into it. So here we are for a digital deep dive. And again, the microform pricing and the three key levers that will move the cost of your digital scanning project. So let's go right into it. Microform type. So when I say microform, I'm referring to microfilm, microfiche, and Aperture card. So they're named different things, but they're all part of the microform family. So you may hear people, or you may even say interchangeably, oh, I have a bunch of microfilm, when actually you have microfiche, or well, I have a bunch of microfiche cards, but you mean Aperture cards. So a lot of people confuse them and interchange them, but they do mean different things, and that's why we want to go over them and describe each type and the particulars about them, and especially how it affects your project cost. But they do all fall into the microform family, just different types within that family. So the first lever is the type of microform. So you have microfilm as the first one. This is kind of the most common, or the one that most people think of when they hear anything microfilm or microfiche. They think about microfilm in most cases. And here's a standard 16 millimeter microfilm roll. It's called an open reel. And what you see, I'm waving around my mouse, is that it's a reel of film, sort of like a spool, and it's an open reel. So what it means is this part attaches to either a reader printer, so you can look at it, see what's on the microfilm, or attaches to a scanner to actually digitize the microfilm. There are other types that come in things called cartridges, basically like a box that contains that reel of film. So it just requires different adapters on the scanners to scan them, but in effect, it's still microfilm, not much of a difference. Now, there's the open reel, the open spool, or they're also just called rolls, or there's the cartridge type. But then within that, you have different types of the actual film itself. So that's kind of the container, the vessel of the microfilm. But the actual film itself, that has differentiators as well. And this will affect the price of your project, because the different types require different scanning, and you'll see here. So 16 or 35 millimeter. 16 millimeter is like office documents, the most typical 16 millimeter microfilm. 35 millimeter, they're larger images, larger frames, and that's for newspapers, engineering drawings, blueprints, things like that, books, things of that will be on 35 millimeter. Then there's the length, the 100-foot or 215-foot microfilm. So 35 millimeter film will always be 100 feet in length. It's called thick film. 215-foot film is called thin film, sort of a nickname for it. And the 16 millimeter images or 16 millimeter film can be either 100 feet or 215 feet in length. Now, what that means is on a standard 16 millimeter roll of microfilm with the 16 millimeter images and 100 feet, if it's simplex, which we'll get into in a second, meaning just one image like this, you're going to have roughly 2,500 images. So let's say this roll is 100, this type right here that we're looking at. Spread that across 100 feet, you're looking at about 2,500 images. You bump it up to 215 feet of film, then you're looking at around 5,000 images. So you're doubling the length of the film, which means more images to process, scan, maybe index. So that's why it affects the price, that length. Reduction ratio means a higher reduction means there are more images. So if you have, let's say, 42x reduction ratio, it means that image you're looking at, if you blow it up 42 times, that's the original size of the image. If you have 48x, that means it's a smaller image because you'd have to blow it up 48 times to get the same original image. So the higher the reduction ratio, which sometimes it does change on film, that means the higher reduction, the smaller the image, likely there are more images. So that can affect it as well. Usually it's not something we dive into in projects, but just for the back of your knowledge, you know that higher reduction ratio means more images. So there's the image layout, simplex, And this is simplex right here, just one frame, one frame, one frame, one frame. Duplex is frames on top of each other. So you're two, 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 two. So that also increases the number of images that have to be scanned and processed. Now, duo and serpentine, very weird. Instead of it, usually this means like front page, back page, front page, back page, front page, back page. So it's the same page, just the front and back. Duo or serpentine film actually means the images go all the way down this way. So it's page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 2500, let's say, and then it wraps back around. So it sort of serpentines back around, and then this is the last image. Not common, sort of weird, just requires a different way to actually, so you can scan the film the same way, but then processing to make sure in the right order, we'd have to realize or know that it is serpentine or duo film so we can process it in the correct order. So simplex, duplex, 35 millimeter multi-image would mean somebody filmed 35 millimeter frames, so like this type of size, but there may actually be multiple images, multiple smaller images in one frame. That would require additional framing of the individual images to put them in a multi-page PDF or something of that sort. And then that, all this ties into the number of images. So if you have a 100-foot simplex, let's say it's 2,500 images on a roll. If you have 215-foot duplex film, you could have, we're actually doing a project right now where you have up to 20,000 images. That's a lot of processing. Clearly, it affects the price. Then you have these things called blips. This can help actually in the indexing phase because you see how there's little markers down here. This is called double level blipping. So you have the small kind of single blips, then the wider, fatter double blips. What this typically means is that the double is the beginning of a file or a document, and these single blips behind it are part of that document. So these, start of a document, 1, 2, 3, 4, those 4 pages are a file, and then it starts another file. That can be useful in indexing. It's just something to know that when you see film, if you have those on there and you have blips, you can let whoever you're working with know that, hey, I've blipped film. That might be useful for indexing. All right, microfiche. Microfiche sheets, that's what we call them. This is a standard 16 millimeter jacket microfiche. And the different types are, again, here it is, the jacket microfiche. So jacket or source microfiche, as they're often called as well, means you have these 5 channels. Like you basically can open these little, you can sort of see those lines there. You can open these channels and then you cut up microfilm and slide them into those channels. So it's sort of like a jacket, like a little warming layer around the microfilm. You cut up the microfilm and load it into these jackets. That's an original. If it's a duplicate jacket, it'll look the same, except you can't physically remove the film because it's a copy. So it's just a single piece of material with those duplicate images. This is also jacket microfiche, but it's 35 millimeter. So 16 millimeter, 35 millimeter. You can see a lot fewer images can fit on there because they're larger. This is COM microfiche. That's computer output microfilm microfiche. So that's basically images that were in digital format put onto microfiche. A lot of times it's index information, or it's a lot of times it'll be financial data, sometimes personnel data, things of that sort, but a lot of times it's in the financial industry. And then other types, you have step and repeat, which we don't have a picture of here. This is an oversized jacket microfiche, so it's basically the same type as this, except it's a lot, it's a longer, the dimensions are larger, so it requires a different scanner to actually capture it because of the dimensions of the actual physical fiche. Now these differences matter because this is the most standard. You can see there's about 60, typically there's up to 60 images on a jacket fiche. These have 6. COM microfiche have usually between 208 to about 270 images. So because there are so many more images, it takes a lot longer to scan, and then you're processing more images. So COM will be the most expensive type to get digitized. Again, reduction ratio can be important because if you have 42x COM fiche compared to 48x, you're gonna have a big gap, a big delta of how many images are on there. Now, I'm not showing a bunch of the variations, but the image layouts can be important because I'll give you an example. Let's say on this jacket microfiche, what can sometimes happen is you think, oh, I'm looking at the fiche. Clearly, there's a title. So all these are going to be right reading. So from left to right, top to bottom, you're just going to read left to right. Maybe. If it's the original source fiche, someone might have put one of those flipped upside down. So you might have this is right reading, this one's upside down, then the rest are right reading. That probably has to be adjudicated. Clients may say, well, I want them all to be right reading. We may have to go in and fix that, or they may all be upside down. That's actually common. So all the channels are flipped. Someone just put them in backwards, basically, or upside down. So the title is right reading, but all the images are actually flipped up. So what we can do is programmatically flip all the images on the fiche. Or like I just mentioned, maybe they actually, instead of putting in the channel this way, they rotate it and put it in the back way. So the images are actually mirrored. They might be mirrored, flipped upside down, and put in the wrong way. So you have many, there are many variations that can happen on microfiche. It's not super common, but when we find them, it's usually a discussion with the client of, well, how do you want to deal with this? We can programmatically do it. If you want us to look through, then we'd have to potentially look at every image because they might not all be consistent. So it's just something to be aware of that it's not always as perfect as it looks when you're just going, oh, from a high level. All right. And then number of images, of course, you have about 60 images, about up to 6 images on 35 millimeter, up to about call it 300 images on COM, and then maybe 90 or so on step and repeat or oversized fiche. And then quality. So something interesting about microfiche, at least the source fiche, the jackets, is because it's strips of microfilm. Sometimes people don't maintain them well. It starts falling apart, strips start falling out, or there might be, half a strip is put in, then later a couple individual images they start falling out. That's something that if you see that happening, try to keep them together as much as possible because that can affect the price if someone else has to try to put them back or deal with those sort of poor condition fiche. All right, now Aperture cards. These are what we just call card drafter cards, and it's similar. And you have a piece of microfilm in here, but the rest of it's kind of a card stock. It's about three inches by 7 inches roughly. Now the different types here. Here's a standard 35 millimeter Aperture card. Very basic, most common. You have one. It's called an Aperture card because there's an aperture, a hole that has that microfilm in it. So the most common 35 millimeter Aperture card. Or 35 millimeter image in that card. You could have 16 millimeter images. So it's a 35 millimeter aperture, but there are 16 millimeter images that you'd have to frame and crop separately. Then this is actually a 16 millimeter dual strip aperture card. I've only seen it once, but they're out there. So you actually have two rows, sort of like a jacket microfiche almost. And then you have duplex images in there. So that required a lot of special scanning and framing to get those images. Not common, but it's there. And what you have is called hollerith. So these little punch holes, if you ever see that, that's called hollerith aperture cards. What these do is they actually tie to that information at top. We'll talk about that more in the indexing though. Now again, they're all pretty similar. The difference in price based on the type is the number of images in the layout. So this one will be more complicated because you have to do a different type of scanning. There are more images. You have to capture duplex. This is the most common. Even these two, hollerith and this standard one here, they can be scanned the same way. It all comes down to indexing will be the change in price for those. If you only wanted an image of that frame there, then it's the same scan price. If you want those images individually framed, individually cropped out, that could affect your project price. All right, lever number two, quantity. This is a pretty quick section, but how many do you have? So if you talk to a scanning company, they say, well, what type do you have? What do you have? How many? And then what do you want to do with it? So that's kind of three levers that we're looking at. But the second part is how many, which is critical. The more you have, typically the unit price comes down, the per unit if you have a lot more than a lot fewer. Microfilm, there's a banker's box of microfilm. 16 millimeter rolls, you're going to hold about 90 rolls in a banker's box. So let's say you have, 50 boxes of microfilm, just do 50 times 90 is 450. It's a ballpark, it's an estimate. That's a quick way to count. If you have a drawer of them and you just have one drawer, just do a quick count. Film's kind of easy. It's the easiest to count because there's usually not an overwhelming number of them. If you have a couple cabinets, you figure out how many rolls are in a drawer and then just kind of extrapolate that. Well, I have, four drawers in this cabinet. There's about 200 rolls, and I have five cabinets. All right, I have about 1,000 rolls. Ballpark numbers. Fiche and Aperture cards are a little different depending on how many you have. You usually don't want to count every individual sheet. I mean, even if you have a couple hundred, once you get to a couple thousand, 10,000, hundreds, thousands, you're not going to count each of them. So the quickest way is just figure out, how are they organized? If they're all organized pretty much the same way, let's again say they're in drawers and cabinets. This is called pinch and inch. Just measure an inch as they're laid out, pull that inch out, and just count that 1 inch. Let's say you come up with 100 sheets of microfiche in that inch, and you have 100 inches of microfiche. So 100 times 100 is, that should be what, 10,000? Roughly 10,000 fiche. That, again, you're just ballparking. You're not going to be exact, but that's the best way, just how they're laid there. Just lay a ruler on. Same with the Aperture cards. Pop out an inch, count them, and just extrapolate that to figure, oh, I have roughly 2,500 or 25,000 Aperture cards, maybe 60,000 com microfiche. That's the best way to do it. It's quick, it's simple, and you're just trying to get high level numbers to get a ballpark scope of work. But the number of film, fiche, or Aperture cards will affect your price. So we do want to know that. That's going to be one of the bigger levers. So if you have, 500 com fiche compared to 50,000, that's a big difference in a project. And the last lever is indexing. That's basically digitally naming a file. So microfilm, couple different ways. The most classic is roll level. There's the box that the roll comes in. You just call it whatever's on that roll because that's how you're getting to it now. It's replicating what you do now. You find the roll, then you look for the images. Very simple, very cost effective. You may want file level. Let's use that newspaper example. Down to the issue date is very common. So each issue is, let's say, 10 to 20 pages. We index at the file level for a newspaper would be the issue. So it's going to be more expensive because now you have to go through all the images to find the issues and then key the month, the title, the day, the issue, things of that sort, at least for this example. So that's more work, more keying, more identification than just roll levels. Let's say, keeping this example, you have a 35 millimeter roll, which will have about 900 frames, which will be about 1,800 pages. And let's say there are about, I don't know, 20 pages. Let's say there are about 100 issues on a roll, just for fun. So if you do roll level indexing like this, and you have 500 rolls, that's 500 index points. But it's very simple. A physical roll, that's an index point. You key the label. 500 pieces of information we'd have to capture. But if you have, let's say, 100 issues on each roll, and there are 500 rolls, that's 50,000 index points that we'd have to capture, and that's multiple fields. The title, like this, the year, the month, the day. So now you're doing, not just 50,000 files you're indexing, but that's also 4 to 5 fields per file. So you can see how even just going to file level, more work, more time, more resources, that'll start increasing your project cost. But if it's necessary and you want it, it's absolutely doable. Image level would be every single image you're capturing something. Like in this example, let's say you're trying to capture the stamp or something of that sort. And on this one, there's actually two of them. You might be capturing two pieces of information on each image. Here's another example of an image. Maybe you're trying to capture like a document number, but it's on every single image. On a roll with 2,500 images, that's 2,500 index points. That's a lot of information to capture. But depending on the type of material you have, it may be consistent. You might have forms where it's a very consistent process, and it's not like you're poking and peeking around trying to find something. It's a consistent location, which makes the indexing a little bit simplified. All right. Microfiche, similar to film in that the base level is just that the physical unit. So the title strip. That's the most common way to index microfiche. That's how you use it now. You just capture the information on that title strip. And it replicates how you look for it now also. Let's say you want to do file level and you want to get every single drawing in this 35 millimeter jacket fiche example. Okay, maybe you go to the title block, like let's say the title block on each drawing and capture the information from there. That's possible as well. Again, but now you're doing, instead of one index point for this fiche, you're doing 6 index points. And if you have 100,000 fiche, that's a lot more indexing. Now, here's we're looking at transcripts. And a similar example, you could just capture that information at the top. If these are student transcripts, maybe you want that information and there's, each student is 4 to 5 pages. Well, I mean, these are blipped because it was from blipped film originally, but looks like they're all single level, so you wouldn't tell where the double is. But let's say you'd have to find where the file starts. You may have to look at every single image to even find which one is a new student. So you have not just, is it, oh, just capture, these 4 pages is a file, these 5 pages. Well, where does that start? Which image starts the next one? So that's where you have to look at each individual image to then find out which one is the new file and then capture it. Starting to get a little more complex. Again, image level on Comfiche, you may have, we're working on a project where there's actually about 150 different students on each Comfiche, which has about 208 images on it. So every 1 to 2 pages, we have to find where the new student starts and find their name, date of birth, school number, those types of fields. But you're looking at all 208 images to find that. That becomes expensive and a little more complex because it's not like, okay, every page is a file. Well, maybe, but it might also be every 2 pages, maybe every 3 pages. So it's not just the actual keying of the data once you find it, it's just identifying. So as you go from fiche level to image level, it becomes more complex and becomes more expensive, which will affect your overall project price. Aperture cards, again, the card level, the physical unit, that is the basic capturing method, which is that title block here. There's an example. And this information should, again, it depends on who created it, this should tie to what's on the image. Here's another example. So this information up here, this is a little more consistent. Like you may not want the roll number, you just may want that application number. That's a field on that title block, but that will tie to the information on the images. File level is, let's say this drawing was this here. You're just, instead of going from the information on the title block, you're going to the image. A little more complex because each image could be different. So maybe we're capturing the information there, maybe we're capturing here, but the next image, the next Aperture card image is a little bit different. So it just becomes more complex so you're not capturing that consistent information. Image level, similar. So file level and image on Aperture cards can be a bit similar if it's one image, but there may be multiple images in that frame. That's where you're going to the individual image or you're capturing his entire file. So Hall Earth is interesting because these when you see this is called Hall Earth information. These punch holes actually tie to this information on top here. And what that means is this information should match what these cards are. And there are actually specific scanners that you can run through that will capture just the image, not the entire card. And these holes, these punch holes, will be read by the machine that will spit out this information. The only issue with that is sometimes they just don't read properly, like maybe just don't get any reading at all, or it just puts out information that may be incorrect because there's some of the punch holes are wrong or just doesn't tie to what the title is. That's usually a small percentage, but it is a possibility. And because you're only getting the image of the film part, not the entire card, you're not really able to go back and see what's on that title block. So it could be useful to lower the price of scanning if you're okay with the Hall Earth and whatever the output is. But if it doesn't read, you may have to go to the image itself to get that keyed, which can make it a little more expensive. But again, it's a very small percentage in most cases. So how much does all this cost? Again, we talked about the type, the quantity, and the indexing. Completely high level in general. Rolls of film, not specifying which type, but assuming the most common type is a 100-foot 16 millimeter simplex, you're looking at about $20 to $30 a roll, complete ballpark. Jacket microfiche, basically around $1 a sheet. Com microfiche, $2 to $3. Aperture cards, 25 to 50 cents per card. But it all depends on those three levers that we were just talking about, which is which specific type, how many of each, and then the type of index you need. Those will be the three levers that really move the cost of your project when you decide to digitize.
There you go. There's a pretty detailed encapsulation of microform pricing, the different factors that will affect your microfilm, microfiche, and Aperture card projects. To see more about microfilm specifically, you can go ahead and check out this video, Guide to Microfilm Scanning. That's going to go into a more holistic approach to the entire process for taking your microfilm to a digital format. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to keep getting more videos from our channel, and see you next time.